You are listening to Radio Aula Mundi.
Hi there, wherever you are. I'm Marco Rixecker, a freelance writer, reporter, producer, teacher, translator, tour guide, poet, singer, and songwriter. I speak several languages, and I'm the creator and founder of Radio Aula Mundi, an evolving podcast station where no language and all languages are spoken. It's a multilingual mix of music, poetry, lectures, languages, interviews, documentaries, recipes, and a lot more, co-produced with the students of the Aula Mundi International Cultural Center. You can find us on radioaulamundi.bandcamp.com, podcasts.apple.com, Spotify, YouTube, Breaker, Player FM, Facebook. Search Radio Aula Mundi. The following narrative includes excerpts from a collection of testimonies and interviews entitled Let's Talk About It Anywhere in the World, where it is all about people's voices, accents, and speech patterns, hand in hand with my own personal anecdotes and observations. In addition to that, people are free to introduce themselves and speak their minds openly in their respective, often indigenous, languages and dialects without any paraphrases or expectations. So, let the story go on from there. Language is a vital tool to put native voices on the map of the indigenous Renaissance. And it can come in all shapes and guises, including poetry. In turn, language revitalization means that the old voice is part of the picture. It includes a traditional way of introducing yourself. Tacey Atsitty knows that. She is a Diné or Navajo poet. And the bio on her webpage suggests that she knows the old voice and ways. She speaks enough Navajo to use it in her poetry and give it new perspectives and possibilities. But she also knows that a name isn't good enough for another person to know who you are and where you come from. It is about introducing yourself and your clans. Tacey Atsitty has appeared on my radar screen through the Poetry Foundation in Chicago, whose website features a list of Native American and indigenous poets, ranging from celebrities to people of a younger generation like her. As a matter of fact, she goes to college in Tallahassee, Florida, where she lives with her husband. But she grew up in Navajo land, on the Navajo reservation. Now she is working on her thesis for her PhD in creative writing. And so, poetry is a creative form of using language with all kinds of metaphors, images, and stories. It is even a tool that can convey indigenous spirituality. Poetry is going to be omnipresent in my conversation with Tacey Atsitty. She's an outstanding performer, which is going to make me realize how spiritual her poems really are, especially given the fact that, for the most part, they're written in English. But they have Diné Bizad, or Navajo names for spiritual beings and entities representing the world of the spirits. Most of the poems Tacey Atsitty is going to read come from published materials and books. Others are about to be published. And there is one notable exception, a poem which she is going to do a reading performance of straight from her computer screen because she has finished it only recently and might still edit it. So, by Euro-American standards, our talk gets outright personal from the start. But again, This is very important to Tacey because it includes the way she's going to introduce herself. We're going to speak a little bit of Navajo, which allows her to include her clans and the different names she has been given, depending on the respective stages of her life. It is all part of the traditional Navajo way, which is exactly what her work as a poet also tries to portray and reflect.
Hi, my name is Tacey Atsitty. Yat eshe sani adal ina dashijine. Tsénahabiłnii nishle. Tkatna sahni bashish chin. Tkabahid dashichedo hashk anhat so dashinele. Akot au Diné hastan nishle. So my English name is Tacey Atsitty, and I am Diné. It's the Navajo tribe in the Four Corners regions of the United States in northeastern Arizona, northwestern New Mexico, and southeastern Utah. And I'm coming to you from Tallahassee. I'm a PhD student in creative writing and poetry now. I'm in my 4th year and working on my dissertation and hope to defend next spring. I love writing poetry and talking about literature and teaching. And I have, a new book coming out, and I'm just excited to be here talking with you all.
Yat she Marco Rixecker. Diné bizad bihosh Yanishne.
Tacey, yeah. Tacey Deshijine, yeah. Or Yinish, yeah.
So how would you introduce your cultural background now in a traditional way?
Yeah, so I did earlier, like you did just now, and I introduced myself. I said my name is Tsénahabiłnii. It means she who is like old women. And as we have our life stages, we have our 4 life stages as we go through life, and we have our childhood name, our adolescent name, our adulthood name, and then our old age name. And so right now I'm in my adult name, and that's what Tsénahabiłnii is. Our names are given to us. We don't choose them. My grandmother's sister gave me my adolescent name, which was a female warrior who split in 2. And my father gave me my childhood name, which was Ed Anak Lohe, which is like laughing girl or smiling girl. And he also gave me my adult name. So yeah, some people when they hear me introduce myself and I say, oh, wow, you must be wise because you're like the old woman. I said, no, I go to bed early and my back hurts, So it's really the reason, right? I think that's my dad kind of thought that about me. But we also introduce ourselves by clan. So, every Navajo person, we're born into 4 clans. And our first clan comes from our mother. And so we say we are that clan. So I say, Tsénahabiłnii, right? I am Sleep Rock people. And what that means is Tsénahabiłnii they were actually the Pueblo people that came to the Navajos as sort of refugees when the Spaniards came up. And there was this area in the Eastern Navajo Nation in present-day New Mexico where, this band of Navajos took in some refugees from the Pueblo neighboring tribe. And those people were Tsénahabiłnii. And so that tells you a little bit about, right, my background from 500 years ago or so. And I'm born for my father. And so that's always the second clan is who you're born for. And I am born for Tsénahabiłnii, which is the Tangle People. And the Tangle People are said to come from the Spider People and introduced weaving and things like that to the Navajo people. And I actually have a poem in here in my new book, At Risk, that mentions this a little bit. And then our third clan, my third clan, is my mother's father's clan, and that is Tsénahabiłnii, which is the water people, water edge people. And my paternal grandfather, my father's father, his first clan is yucca fruit strung out in a line clan. And so that's who I am as a Navajo or a Diné woman. It tells me who I'm related to. Sometimes when I introduce myself, traditionally to a group of people that I don't know, I will have people come up and say, "Hey, I'm your auntie," or "Hey, I'm your grandpa," because we can make, relations. There are over 100 clans within our tribe. And so they always say that we're never really alone as, Diné people. We always have relations, is what we call it. And finally, of course, our clan system tells who we can and can't marry, right? Because even though we are not blood related, if we have a clan that's related, that's the same, we try to avoid marrying within the same clan system. So
how important is it to you to share all this personal information with the world right now?
It's the way that we introduce ourselves, right? It has a lot to do with our identity, when we introduce ourselves this way, people within our tribe that know the clans, they can locate us and they can know where we come from. And one thing I didn't say about, the Tangle people, my father's people, there's, characteristics that come along with certain clans. And so the Tsénahabiłnii are known to be kind of mean people. And so if you know that about a clan, then you might be like, okay, we'll just kind of make sure that we don't want her to be mean to me. And so I always like to tease, though. I say, I'm half Tangle people and half, Sleep Rock people. And I said, don't worry, I'll be nice tonight. I'm both half nice. So I can be nice. But it's so sharing this with the world, right? My audience. And I feel like, most non-Diné do not know what all of that entails, right? They don't know everything that I just explained. And so it's interesting, though, to me when I was in graduate school, I went to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and I was in a class and I asked a girl, I said, well, where are you from? Because for our people, it helps us identify who they are and where they're from. And she just kind of looked at me, as like, well, why do you want to know? And I said, well, it's part of your identity for me. It's how I locate you. And she was like, that's so reductive. And I just thought, well, that's just how I was raised. That's just the way that our people, kind of move. And so we can know, if we're related or not. Yeah.
How do I sound to you?
Well, definitely have an accent, but yeah, and I was really surprised, but I was, happily surprised. I was like, whoa, hey, that's a first from any of my, interviewers that, anyone who's interviewed me before. So it was kind of nice and exciting and refreshing. And so, yeah, I feel like definitely our language has gotten more global, right? The accessibility for it with, I think, Duolingo and Rosetta Stone. That's, it's been pretty wonderful that way. And I feel similarly in terms of language, revitalization. One of the projects that I work with is the Navajo Film Festival, and it's a grassroots film festival. We've been going, maybe 5 or 6 years now. And it's, I co-started it with a friend named Michael Lewis. And he and I were talking about just, the ideas that certain languages hold that don't exist in other languages. I'm sure there's some great, academic term for it, but we decided that, we would like to create an event, a space where people can make short films. So they're only 4 minutes in length, and they are completely in Diné, in the Navajo language. And you don't have to be Diné to submit these films as part of the festival. And so we had our last festival this past summer at San Juan College in Farmington, New Mexico, and it was a pretty good turnout. I think we had about 70 or 80 people for having just sort of come out of the pandemic, and so that's been nice. But we also, we're interested in creating a cache of the language. I think that I myself am a novice to the language. I'm always learning. And, a lot of problems I feel like when we're learning the language is it's always the same kind of, hello. Oh, yes, how are, yes, hello, ish banana, what are you doing or how are you doing? And it's just kind of this, very simple exchange, and you don't learn too much else. And so creating these videos gives us the opportunity to hear the language in other circumstances where we normally wouldn't hear them. And what we love and encourage is for interaction across the generations. A lot of the youth or even adults, they kind of have to work with grandma or grandpa and say, how do I say this, and work with translation and transcription and things like that. And so we're, that's one of our goals, is that communication happens about the language between, the older generation and the younger generations. So yeah, like I said, I'm still learning. I'm not fluent. Obviously I understand more than I speak, but yeah, that's why we began the Navajo Film Festival.
How poetic is Diné?
Yeah, I understand it as very poetic. And that's how I've, had my dad and, others have explained it, that it is a very beautiful language, that it is poetic in thought and ideas. And I mean, there are certain things that I don't really understand, sometimes even about the humor and things like that. But I know that I'm sure it is very funny, right? Like, and beautiful in many ways.
One thing about indigenous languages is that words can have meanings way beyond the range of Euro-American comprehension. I asked Tacey Atsitty about that. Not only does she agree with me and answer my question, but as an illustration, she is also going to read one of her poems. Do you have a poem that illustrates that point?
I do. You'd have to give me a second to look it up. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. It's going to be on, because it's not, published yet. So let me look it up. Okay. So this poem talks about, so it's kind of in three parts. It is influenced by Dante's La Vita Nuova. I don't speak Italian. And so it comes in three parts, and it tells the story of how monsters were born, and does talk a little bit about this accountability. And Here it is. Necho Dilchil, Black World. It was their first world together, in their first home during a nice venison stew meal when Altsehastan and Altsehastin began to quarrel. I mean, really quarrel. First man's back muscles were still throbbing from hauling the buck down the mountain, and first woman's hands were still bloody from the slaughter. There, as the sun shone, a fiery blaze opens the ripples of the water. Dishes went flying and words broke, their home to shards. Little did they know their arguing over who worked harder in their relationship would cause a fissure from which monsters would arise. When the river separated us, it was us who created monsters, Eve. Five-fingered ones, Diné, like you and me. Tell me, what was it again that we grieve? Alkedan, first man and first woman, heaved it out, hot words leaving his body. It was us who created monsters. Eve at the riverside throwing clay pots. We've come a long way since the cornfield, since she. Tell me, what was it again that we grieve? Whole nation of genders lost to conceive from waves, from warm flesh, fresh after a kill. It was us who created monsters, Eve. Us who tossed aside cacti and stones, we've left ourselves, our fingers, our babies, we. Tell me, what was it again that we grieve? They survived ravines and ravenous thieves, but found suck, then came back to eat us. It was us who created monsters. Eve, tell me again, what is it that we grieve?
Do you have an example that would illustrate Hojo and explain it to the world?
Maybe, let's see. The one that's coming to mind is the final poem of Lacing, and it's Roman numeral 14. From the mountainside we appear to wear each other deep into the road. We appear in the braids of slowed water at our knees, as though prepared for a ritual among the falls. It breaks all around us, lace in its final wear. We nearly swallow ourselves, bear every blue we have to give, until lakes settle in with the stars. We came to see stars wiggle, to wander the unknowing grays and blues, until finally our flowing bears our wrists. I wade for you, and see the stars wade for you. Resting on an altar crochet, we approach land and sky, kneeling together on that day.
My first thought is that this poem sounds like a promise.
Yes, that's exactly what it is, right? There's an altar, there's a covenant that's being made, and it's a covenant between God and between each other. And that's essentially what this is, right? That it's a ritual, and it's walking into the unknown, right? It's walking into, I call it the grays and blues, the unknowing grays and blues, and being able to walk together, right? And that's what At Risk is really about, is trying to find and live your life in a way, right, that reaches and where you walk through with Hojon, right? Walking through and whether or not you find love, right? You've tried and you've, striven to live that way.
So, Tacey Atsitty is eager to share some of her poems throughout our conversation. In the process, we also get to discuss one of her projects associated with her scientific research at the University of Florida. As a result, she's going to read a poem that is still unpublished at the time of our online conversation.
So this poem is called Sonnet for My Wrist. Sonnet for my wrist. I tend to mistake your ribs for a hand towel. It hangs on a nail above the wash bowl, the hand towel ripped. There's something wearing about the end curve of thread. When I sleep, I keep my palms open. Verve. We were lovers in a field of gray. In Navajo, we say something rote, all radical when you hurt me something close. Even you waft. It's best I tether, forget flyaways I plucked. My bones, they lie to me like fray, like gaunt. I don't crawl back for fragments, even a spinal cord of sinew. It's not going to close. You rope me from stray to grip. It's all for naught. I'm born for my father, Tangle People, our mouths in webs. Tonight my wrists part and you chase my insides until they dangle into pieces.
What does this poem tell us about you and your background?
Yeah, so this poem is, this poem and, the book is dedicated to my father, I say, to Shije, and every man who extended me his wrist. And so when I say that this is a sonnet for my wrist, right? And I say, I'm born for my father, Tangle People, our mouths and webs tonight, my wrists part, and you chase my insides until they dangle into pieces. So there in this book, it's, I have this sonnet redoubled. So there are 15 sonnets. It's the final part of the book, and it's called Lacing. So it's 15 sonnets. And then I have a poem called Lace Sonnet. And so there's this weaving together of life and relationships, and there's delicacy, right, like lace is, but it's also a strength. It's very strong. And so when I think about when I'm telling, or not when I, but the I was saying, I'm born for my father, Tangle People, our mouths and webs, right? There's a sense of identity and a declaration of the identity and knowing where one comes from.
What's the difference between a poem and a sonnet?
I think a sonnet, right, is supposed to be like a short song, or is right? A sonnet is a poem. It's a certain form with a poem with certain constraints, and it's got the 14 lines, and it's got like a turning point in the 9th or the final line, depending on what kind of sonnet it is, and it's can be written in iambic pentameter, and can have the theme of love, and so that's, I think for me, that's what the sonnet is. It's a type of poem, but it's also a song, and it's a very succinct, for me, what I use the sonnet for is I have these experiences and like to share those experiences in a very succinct, tight form.
How did poetry come to you?
Yeah, I have been writing for a very long time. When I was young, my mother would, put us all, me, my brother, and my two sisters at the kitchen table, and she would write in our journals often, I think a couple times a week. And while she was writing in one of our journals, she would give, the other of us our journals, and we would, write in our journals, but I was too young, so I would draw in the journals, in my journal. And so, I have drawings, amidst my mother's writings. And and so that was just cultivated. My mother died when I was 3, nearly 4, and my older sister and my cousin and my aunt in a car accident in 1986. And so my father and my grandmother, my mom's mom, they continued to cultivate, that writing, especially with me and I like to write stories. And my grandma, excuse me, she submitted, I remember, one of my stories to some magazine contest, and I think I was maybe like 11 years old. I was really young. But my dad's like, she needs a typewriter. And so I remember I got an electric typewriter my dad bought me. And so I was, typing away. And then, I would continue to write a little bit, but it wasn't until I got into like middle school and high school. In high school at Navajo Preparatory School in Farmington, New Mexico, where I joined a team of poetry slam and started competing with a team. And we would compete at the national poetry competitions. One year in Hartford, Connecticut, and one year we hosted in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then my final year was in San Francisco, California. And we, as a team and individually, we always placed, like, I think top 10, just kind of scattered throughout. So I really loved writing, growing up. And then when I went to Brigham Young University for my undergraduate degree, I studied English and really enjoyed the poetry classes that I took. And so that's kind of how it all started.
When a poem comes to you, how do you perceive it now?
Yeah, now it's different. I feel like sometimes the poem, it is similar to, the Michelangelo saying where, like, I didn't really create the statue, just was there all along and I just chipped away the pieces. Sometimes I do feel that way about poetry. I feel like I have a certain way that I think the poem wants to be in terms of what I want it to be, but it doesn't feel that way. And then I kind of like fight with the poem for a while, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'll let the poem be what it wants to be as opposed to what I want it to be. And then it always works out better for me that way. And so, yeah, I think that's how it starts. And sometimes, my poems now, they start with an image or they start with a feeling or an experience or, anything like that. So it just kind of, it just varies nowadays. It's not only one way.
Was that, in terms of what you've just said, different? Was it more consistent, or was it just ideas that had come up over the years and then you got it together as an editorial project, so to speak?
So I think I just, 12 years ago, I just fell in love with the sonnet, and I just wrote sonnet after sonnet after sonnet. And it wasn't too often. I mean, I do have poems in here that are not sonnets. But for the most part, I mean, there are probably at least maybe 25 sonnets in here, or, sonnet-like poems. And so I think that that's also a large part of it is I got used to the form. I'm comfortable with the form, comfortable in terms of, yes, it's challenging, right? It's challenging for me to write these sonnets. And, not all of them, they don't meet all of the criteria of a sonnet. Some don't have 14 lines and some don't have, many don't have iambic pentameter. Some don't have like, a conventional type of love or, what you would think. Sometimes the volta is in a different area. So it just kind of varies. But yeah, I fell in love with the sonnet, and I don't know how long I'll be writing sonnets. But and also, I said that I'm a doctoral student at Florida State University right now, and I'm working on my dissertation. And one of the exciting kind of forms that I've discovered is the emblem poems from the 15th and 16th century that started with a poet named Andrea Alciato in Italy in the 1500s. 1531 is when I believe he had his first book of emblems published. And so there's a picture, right? There's like a title or a motto, an impressa, and then there's a figure, like a photo, not a photo, but a picture. It's, it was a woodcut back then, and then they have borders and then there's a sonnet in terms of like a short poem, not with all the conventions of today, but some of the conventions like with the rhyme schemes and stuff. But so I've really enjoyed that form, and I am writing at least a small part of my dissertation that has those emblem poems, and I'm writing a bestiary in the emblematic form of Navajo monsters. Yeah, so I'm really excited about it.
What is a poem that you would like to share with the audience in this context now, like something the world needs?
Yes, so a big part of my emblem, my bestiary it's tied to the Navajo monsters in our creation stories. And our monsters, right? I grew up listening to stories from my dad. He'd tell us about monsters, and I just kind of in my imagination, oh, they killed our people, they ate our people, and so we need to be careful. So there's old monsters, there's like contemporary monsters. And I think that instead of like fearing, for me, what this project is accountability. And within our stories, the Navajo monsters were created by our people, but we never talk about it, right? We never acknowledge it. We're not accountable for the monsters that we create. All we know is we're running from them. All we know is that they eat us, and we fear them. And so what this project does is it's sort of a call for accountability. Like, hey, we created them. Like, we're going to have to accept them and love them somehow, right? Because for Navajos, our monsters are half non-human entity and half human. Okay, the mothers were all human, and the fathers were all like objects, essentially. And so having that accountability and acknowledging that like we're the ones who created them, and so not saying that we have to destroy them, but we have to love them and take them in, because I'm speaking metaphorically but also Navajo way, right, that they are our relatives. And what the bestiary I'm writing does is it anthropomorphizes a little bit, but it says, well, what is their narrative? Like, how would I feel if I was left for dead and then had to grow up on my own and be rejected from my mother's people? How would I feel? And so these poems sort of give them a narrative, sort of give them a voice, and humanizes the monsters.
Postscript. As part of my conversations with people, I often have them ask questions, either specifically for someone I know I'm going to chat with in the near future, or broadly for anyone I might speak with anytime, anywhere in the world. As a result, 2 questions are available for Tacey Atsitty. One comes from a contemporary Native American artist who lives in Tucson, Arizona. His name is Lucky Salway. He's half Tohono O'odham and half Oglala Lakota. His question has Tacey think for a bit about the purpose of publishing poetry.
How does your passion help the world?
So I feel like my work, especially, a lot of how I understand poetry, it's twofold in terms of like purpose, right? I write to process through experiences or emotions, but I also write for an audience that is both, Diné and non-Diné. And basically would like, one of the purposes of my writing is to establish that I am human, right? Even though you're not a woman, and I don't mean you, but right, like the audience, anyone, you're not a woman, or you're not Diné, or you're not, a PhD student, or your mother didn't die when you were 3, or even though, any of these things where we kind of don't align, it doesn't mean that I'm not human, right? And it doesn't mean that you're not human. And I think a lot of times when we dehumanize people, we think less of them, and we do crazy things when we dehumanize people. And so if I can write, and I feel like Joy Harjo, this was a big push for her, I think, in all of her work, is how I am human, or how I came to be human, because so often people think that Native or Indigenous people are all dead. I've met people like, oh, you're the only one I've ever met. I thought you guys were all dead. And so when you realize like, oh, okay, yeah, this girl has experienced loss. This girl has experienced grief. This girl has, loved and lost. This girl has, like me, right? Like me. And so that connection is really important to me, even though these aren't narrative poems, they're experiences and moments that all humans go through.
What's the coolest feedback you've ever gotten?
Well, it's funny because I'll say this, and it doesn't quite answer your question, but when I first wrote Rain Scald, I submitted it for, some prizes, and there was a prize at the Kenyon Review. There used to be an Indigenous Writers Prize. And I had a reading in, I forget the name of the town, but it was in Ohio. And I had a friend who had a reading at Kenyon College. And so I went over after my reading and I saw her read. And, some of the professors at Kenyon College heard I was coming. And so they took me out to lunch. And then one of them said, yeah, this is the group of professors who read your work and judged it. And then all of a sudden I felt naked. I was like, ah! Because it was the first audience, that first initial, interaction that I had with any audience, because up until that point, I felt like my poetry was only extended to me in my workshop and not to any others. But I realized, over time that, being open and, having those thoughts about, right, humanizing oneself and unity in a way, right? You said that we are human and that we do go through things.
Another question asked by someone else comes from a Chicago musician by the name of Mark Winnebal. He describes his question as kind of a classic, and it leads to a longer discussion with Tacey Atsitty about its relationship with some typical features of traditional Navajo culture. And Tacey Atsitty is going to read another poem of hers as an illustration for her answer to Mark Winnebal's question and subsequent comments and statements.
If you could be a superhero, this is a kind of a classic that people ask me, and it's, I think, always provokes a pretty thoughtful answer. And you could have a superpower, what would it be and why?
I always say invisibility. I think not so that I can, like, kind of, like, what do they call it? Like, sneak up on people or, like listen into, anything like that. But I don't know. I feel like part of me is very social, but part of me is also, because I'm a poet, like I just like to be by myself, kind of. Sometimes I can be very reclusive. And I think a large part of me sometimes just doesn't want to be seen. I just kind of want to go about and, make bread and plant plants and write poems and travel and do what I want to do. And I think sometimes with the light that poetry has brought to me, I sometimes have a hard time being seen. And so that's why I feel like invisibility would be my superpower.
How do you balance solitude and society?
I don't know. I feel like it's just come second nature to me now. I feel like I have been doing it for a long time, and I know when I need to pull back, when I kind of lose my energy for, society, and feel like I haven't had solitude in a while, or, sometimes it's on a daily basis and sometimes it's on a monthly basis. But being a PhD student, I feel like most of the time I have a lot more solitude these days, and especially, coming out of the pandemic, of course, there has been quite a bit of solitude. And so we're getting back into, the social aspects of life. But I mean, don't get me wrong. I love actually, being social. My husband says that I'm way more social than he is. And yeah, I mean, I think this week alone we had like a Friendsgiving dinner, and then we had the English department grad, party, and then we had what did we have Tuesday night? I know we had something. And anyway, it's just something, it's like something every week, or, multiple times a week. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it all. And then I come crashing, burning down after a few months. But yeah, I don't know. I guess it takes some getting used to also.
What's your secret spot like?
I think I don't have one spot. I think my home, right, is my spot, or my truck. My truck has been with me like 20 years, over 20 years. So even in my truck, and my truck, I've taken from New Mexico, driven it to the Alcan Highway up to Alaska and back, and then driven it to New York when I went for my master's and back, and now driven it to Florida. This is from New Mexico, right? And so I've kind of been to all four quarters of the United States, four corners of the whole United States, and so there's some camaraderie with my truck. And I actually have a poem I'd like to share that my truck makes its way into my poems every now and then. And this is a poem, let's see, called The Night My Wrist Broke. The night snow fell so gently I mistook it for female. They came ready for blood. My dad raised me better than this. 5 male EMTs peered into the light of my truck. Their eyes scanned every dark crease of my body. It was cold. That night, my truck was a cage protecting me still. I could hardly exhale. I'm sorry, I am crying. All but one looked away, allowing me to cry for a moment longer, as though I were one of them. I kept my right wrist close to my chest, a pain so clear I could see every empty cavity in my rib cage, heart thumping like a bass guitar, hand strumming to the sound of a girl wailing.
What were you thinking?
I was trying to relate an experience of pain, but I was also, for years now, right, for 10 plus years, the wrist has made its way into my poems. And for many years, right, I didn't understand, like, what is the importance of the wrist? And, even the book, it's called, At Wrist. And so this poem was in part acknowledging my wrists, and with, I was in an accident. That's where this poem came from. It was an ice storm in Salt Lake City where I was living at the time. And I had started to slide, and I wasn't going too fast, but there were, 5 lanes of traffic, and there was a lot of accidents. It was an ice storm that people didn't anticipate. And so when I, had my hands on the steering wheel and I was getting ready to have some impact with a car in front of me, I thought, oh, I need to let go of the steering wheel, to keep my hands and my wrists and myself safe. But then I thought, well, what if I hit the car and the wheel just kind of goes wherever and goes into another car? And so I thought, okay, no, I need to hold the steering wheel. And so my wrists, my hands, they took the impact of that hit. And I had some, what do you call them? I can't think right now. I'm sorry. Supports, like Velcro supports for my wrists and my hands.
Oh, like a cast?
It was like a cast, but it wasn't permanent kind of thing, or semi-permanent. It was just a support that I would put on. And so I was walking around, with these supports to help my wrists, to help me not use them and to help them heal. And so that was a big part of, also what I was doing with that poem was trying to understand the importance of the wrists and the pain that came from that experience, and not just, this one particular experience, but this book At Wrist is about love and relationships, familial, relationships, but also romantic relationships. And, when, there are experiences that you have with people where you have impact in terms of, you clash, and sometimes there's, pain. There's pain that you kind of have to deal with and to get through and take time to heal. And so those were some of my thoughts when I was writing that poem.
How much do you think before it's all right?
Oh, it varies. Some poems I feel like I know when they're done. I don't feel like they're kind of, like pestering me. This particular book I wrote between 2011 and 2017, 18. And I let it sit for like 3 or 4 years before I decided to really kind of, delve back into them and try to organize in a way that I thought that, the poems should be put out. And so that's what I did, about a year and a half ago, with some of the help from my classmates here at FSU in our workshops for poetry. And a friend of mine also, took a really good look and helped me sequence the poems in a way that really work well. And so that, right, that took a long time, right? Like I left them. I call it, I let them stew for like 3 or 4 years, and I think part of it was I needed the distance from the poems. And I was interviewed yesterday by a small radio station up in Madison, Wisconsin. And theirs was the first interview that I had done on the book. And even though I've been revising, right, I had been revising and had been kind of interacting with the poems, I really didn't get into the meat or the thick of it, right, the emotion and the feeling and things like that, until I had to talk about it. And so yesterday was a kind of a nice like priming pump for our conversation, and it was difficult. And I think that's what I realize now is, right, that distance and time needed to happen between the publication of the book and when I felt like the book was done being written.
How do you define beauty?
Yes, Hojon is beauty, like you said, right? That's one translation, but it's a conglomeration of peace, of balance, harmony, happiness, I would say, joy, and it doesn't just have to do, I think, like with your mental state, but it has to do with your spiritual state as well. Where you are living in a way that you are making Hojon choices, or feeling Hojon, right? In Navajo we say Hojon Nasha, I walk in beauty, right? I walk in peace, I walk in goodness, I walk in balance, I walk in harmony. And in harmony with oneself, in harmony with the land, in harmony with the humans, with other humans, family, relatives, friends, and the non-human, right, animals and such. And so when we walk, it's not, just the physical walking, but it's the walking through life that we strive to live in. And that's how I understand Hojon.
Eventually, it is Tacey Atsitty's turn to ask a broad and open question. There is enough time at the end of our conversation for her to give that task some deep thought, before she comes up with an excellent question that I will be more than happy to share with anyone, anytime, anywhere in the world. And the story goes on from there.
I'm interested in when I travel, I'm interested in like learning other people's normal, like what's normal for them, right? Because it's different for me. Like I guess what I'm saying is sometimes I think that we feel, artists, musicians, writers, sometimes we feel like, what do I know? What can I do? What can I create? Why does my voice matter? And so, yeah, I guess those are my questions, right? Like, how have you come to know that your story, your voice, your music, your art, your poems, how have you come to know that they matter?